Good people, we meet again. Welcome to the CNBC Africa Breakfast Roundtable with myself, Fifi Peters. And as you should know by now, on the menu, we are looking at South Africa's B20 journey. It is a historic journey in many senses, given that it's the first time, of course, that the G20 are coming to the African continent. Collectively, as you would know, the G20 represent around 90% of global GDP, around 3/4 of global trade, and are home to quite a number of us. In terms of world population stats, that's around 62% as well. And so it is a new road that South Africa and the African continent is embarking on. It's a road that is also currently unwinding. But there can be quite a number of lessons, one can argue, that can be drawn from the past and the previous part that we are coming from the G20 presidencies that have been hosted for the past 3 years by our neighbors in the global south. So one can argue that many lessons can be taken and drawn from their presidency. So in a short while, we're going to be getting into the nitty-gritties of South Africa's B20 journey, specifically asking and answering any questions that you may need to know for our viewers who are tuning in on CNBC Africa as well as on our social media platforms. Feel free to send through your questions on those platforms, and we are joined by a live audience here in our Johannesburg headquarters as well, who will be weighing in their voice too. So before we get started, perhaps let's all get on the same page and a bit of a scene setter of the G20, of the B20 specifically, and what their role in the whole mix is. Let's take a look.
The Business 20, also known as B20, serves as the official G20 dialogue forum for the global business community, shaping policy recommendations for the world's leading economies. At its core, the B20 focuses on unlocking inclusive growth, accelerating the just transition, investing in human capital, and driving industry reforms to build resilience. While the B20 aims to foster local and global partnerships, it operates amid shifting political landscapes, tariff uncertainties, and challenging trade relationships. In this environment, how can South Africa present a united front and position itself and the African continent as an attractive destination for investment?
With the scene set, let's get the conversation going. And I'd like to introduce you, of course, to my panelists who are steering us in that direction, as well as yourselves. Of course, we will be taking questions. But beginning with the gentleman on my immediate left, Mr. Luthando Vuba, the Executive Head of International Trade and Business Banking for the Standard Bank Group. Welcome. We also have Ms. Busisiwe Mavuso, B20 South Africa Advisory Council Chair. Good morning, ma'am.
Thank you.
And last but not least, Mr. Cass Kuvadia, B20 South Africa Sherpa. Cass, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
And so I'll begin with you, actually, Cass. Just given the fact that you are the Sherpa, the leader, I imagine the one who's guiding quite a significant part of the process. And I think that this conversation that we're having is quite timely. I think it is the first 100 days, or we're embarking on the 100 days of our presidency as a G20, and therefore by default your presidency is the B20. How are things going?
On the B20 side, very, very well, and thank you for this opportunity to talk about the B20. Our job, and my job as a Sherpa of the B20, is to ensure that at the end of this process, and it's a process that goes on for the rest of the year, we come out with a set of policy recommendations to the G20 countries that are implementable and that are actionable and that actually make sense. We had a very, very successful launch in Cape Town. By all accounts, those that I spoke to, global people who were there said, and even if I say so myself, it was the best launch they've attended. So we've set the bar high. And we now just about finished appointing co-chairs for the various task forces. We'll, in the next week, have populated the task forces with people from the G20 countries and from the continent. And then the work of the task forces start to actually arrive at those policy recommendations. So it's gone very well. Business has been phenomenally supportive, both through sponsorships and in-kind support. And I think that we're on track. If we compare ourselves to Brazil, that did a pretty good job on the B20, I think we sort of where they were, if not a bit ahead of them.
And I'm glad that you mentioned Brazil, because just from a process standpoint, if you can just maybe help us understand how that process unfolds in, of course, South Africa having assumed the presidency from Brazil, who assumed the presidency from Indonesia, or from India, who assumed the presidency from Indonesia as well. So while this is a new journey that we're on, I assume that we're not completely starting from scratch. So please help us understand how that passing of the baton in this relay of ultimately making society better for all actually happens.
Yeah, so let me, you said making society better for all, so just let me say that the B20 theme for South Africa is inclusive growth, prosperity in a cooperative world. So inclusive growth is important, and so economies need to talk to the needs of all our people so that they become prosperous. And given the current geopolitical situation, cooperation is very important. So we've interacted significantly with Brazil, actually. Myself and the BUSA chair, Tolisi, went down to Brazil in August or so last year to meet with them. And then we were there for the B20 launch in October. And Brazil, CNI, which is the biggest business grouping in Brazil, has done a phenomenal job. They essentially gave us a playbook of their experiences, of what their lessons were. And we've leveraged that for our B20. We've changed things where we need to change, but we certainly didn't have to reinvent the wheel. We've also put together a troika, if you like, Brazil, ourselves, and the American Chamber of Commerce in Washington, because we, as you said, this is the fourth country consecutively from the South that's hosting the B20. At the end of this year, we hand over to America. Our counterparts there are the American Chamber of Commerce in Washington, with whom we have a very good relationship. They were at our launch, as were some American businesses, and they've assured us that American business is behind B20 South Africa. Forget the politics. Not that we can forget it, but despite the politics. So we are working with Brazil, with the American Chamber of Commerce, to ensure that there's a smooth transition. The problem, I guess a problem, is that neither the B20 nor the G20 has a permanent secretariat. So essentially the host country is responsible for making it all happen and to ensuring there's a smooth transfer. And because we want actionable recommendations, we're talking to the American Chamber of Commerce to track those recommendations next year, so that we can actually see that there's progress.
Okay, so we said quite a lot there, and we'll come back to you just to dig a little deeper, but let's get your view and perception of the tracking process, Busi, because they say that, when you're on a journey, it's very good to reflect and review, how you're going on that journey. And the 100-day mark is traditionally the popular mark to do the reflection and the review process. So your role as advisory council chair, ma'am, is what exactly, and how has that been going these past almost 3 months?
So the Local Advisory Council is really a structure that is set up alongside the steering committee. So the steering committee of B20 at the moment is made up of BUSA and BLSA. As you know, BUSA is actually, as the apex business body in this country, they are the ones who are actually hosting the B20, and they've obviously requested BLSA to tag along and help in the co-hosting. So that's why you've got dual chairs. That's why you've got dual chairpersons of this Local Advisory Committee in the form of Kolegane and myself, and the chairs in the form of Mkolisi Mgojo, who is the president of BUSA, and Nonkululeko Nyembezi, who is the chairman of BLSA. So the Local Advisory Council is meant to be a sounding board to the steering committee, because there are a lot of decisions that have to be made. There is a lot of work that has to be done by Kes and the team, and Kes and the team obviously then refer to the steering committee as the steering committee. It is just an acknowledgement that we don't have a monopoly on wisdom, and we therefore defer, to these CEOs who actually make up the local advisory council, and that is how it's actually constructed. We have actually selected CEOs who are representing all the different industries, so that as and when we do the work that needs to be done, we can ensure that the work that we do is actually not too far off from what CEOs and businesses are experiencing in the coalface. Remember, BUSA and BLSA are business associations. We are still not at the we represent companies that are at the coalface. We are not at the coalface. Obviously, Kes and the team, are obviously not at the coalface of business. So if this process is meant to develop policy recommendations that are going to go to the G20, it makes sense, that as we do the work, as we think about how to best put our foot forward as South Africa, we need to have this engagement with obviously the creme de la creme of this country, in a form of business, and that is the structure that we've actually set up. So that is really the role of the local advisory council.
Okay, so again, ma'am, just to try to understand exactly how it works. So your chair, how many people are on your committee? How often do you engage with your predecessor, as it were? Cass was talking about quite a great playbook that was handed over from Brazil. How is it about yourself? How, you guys meet with virtual meetings? Do you call each other? How does it work?
So we meet, the cadence of meetings, I think, is about once every 2 months. I'm tempted to say a quarter, but between a quarter and actually 2 months, it's a group of about 20 to 30 CEOs, because we obviously could not include everyone. We, as a structure, are not engaging with the Brazilians. The Brazilians had their own local advisory council made up of Brazilian CEOs, because as the host, you also have your own agenda in terms of, when all is said and done, what is it that I'd like to achieve, at the end of 2025 as South Africa. And we obviously have a theme that Kes has actually spoken about, but we are very clear as a country, both G20 and B20, that this should be an opportunity to showcase South Africa as an investment destination. And in the work that we do, and yes, the bulk of the work is being done in the task forces, which are led by South African CEOs, but as a country, outside of the task forces, as these people come in and out of South Africa, what is the messaging? What is the narrative? What do you want them to take away? The litmus test for us as South Africa, when all this is said and done, should be to get as much foreign direct investment as possible into this country. We are very clear that we want to showcase South Africa as an investment destination. We are very clear that we want to showcase the brilliant work that we've done, as a country after the state capture project. We are very clear that we actually want to show the fruits of the structural reform agenda, and the evidence on the ground, in terms of the fact that the structural reform agenda is actually working. We actually want to highlight and celebrate the fact that you've got a very strong business-government partnership, which can actually be used as a model for other countries that are actually trying to change their economy's trajectory. We actually, when all is said and done, would like to ensure that we showcase South Africa not just as a force to be reckoned with in the African continent, but as a force to be reckoned with, in this emerging economies, developing economies strata. Now, when you look at that cluster and that strata, there's about 30 or 40 countries which sit in the developing and emerging economies. These countries of the global north, who are actually in the G20, are continuously looking for markets. They sit with a lot of money, they want to invest, and we should be utilizing this opportunity to say, if you want to invest, look no further. Mm-hmm. Even if you're looking at these emerging economies and developing economy strata, South Africa has done so much over the past 3, 4, 5 years, and we are the best vehicle to house your investment. And therefore, the conversations that we're having, the posture that we've taken, the narrative and the messaging that we actually want to put out there with the help of the local advisor council is precisely that.
Well, I think that African CEOs are seeing us. I mean, we recently had the president hosting several of them. I believe the chair of Bank of America, someone can correct me there if I'm wrong, we had Microsoft coming through and dropping a whole lot of billions in terms of their data center that they're building here, Google doing the same. So they are seeing us, but we'll get to that also and see if maybe we can be doing more, or if we can be seen more. Luthando, your CEO is a chair of one of these task forces that we've been hearing about, and he particularly chairs the Finance and Infrastructure Task Force, and maybe we'll actually get the opportunity to speak more about the others. But Group CEO of Standard Bank, Sim Chabalala, of course. So tell us a little bit more about what that means for the Standard Bank Group in terms of your role as chair of that task force.
Thanks, Fifi, and thank you to CNBC for hosting us. So I think, well, as a Standard Bank Group, let me start there. For us, it's a given that we are fully supportive of the G20 and the B20 and making sure that this, I want to say once in a lifetime opportunity, but this first of a lifetime opportunity for Africa to host the G20 is done, and is done exceptionally well. And we see that being something critical for business to get involved in, because government cannot do it alone. So Sim has been mandated to take over the chair of the Finance and Infrastructure Task Force. When you look at Africa's challenges, when you look at South Africa's challenges, I think the two are very sort of combined. When you look at the other emerging markets in developing economies, Brazil, India, the two are intertwined. You know, you need the financial flows to be able to develop more infrastructure, and those returns then have yields and invite more infrastructure, more investment, which enables more jobs being created, more activity in the economy. So that's sort of the natural link that we see. But then when we assess what is the challenge for a South Africa and the rest of Africa, it is the cost at which the capital is coming. It is the risk premium that African economies are then paying for the capital, which just makes it longer period of like how quickly you can get into then investing into infrastructure. And currently at what Africa needs, which is like a shortfall of needs around $100 billion US dollars a year, we're only doing about 11 of that. So already you're at a backlog of the infrastructure that is required to industrialize the continent, and then you're tracking at that current rate. So the Finance and Infrastructure Task Force has to then very deliberately, but very targetedly, right? What is that 80-20? What's that 20% area that can have that 8% impact? And so we're looking at that cost of capital piece, and I believe it's also aligned to the G20 presidency, where the president has indicated the need to have a cost of capital commission. And because we see this as Africa, G20 and B20, it has that vaster impact onto the rest of the continent as we address that, with the different stakeholders when it comes to that. And then the other piece is, importantly, there's infrastructure and then there's strategic infrastructure. And I think whether you're talking AFCFTA, whether you're talking AFCFTA or you're talking energy security, it is the critical components on any economy that you need to have in place. Energy is one of those. You need to make sure that you have food security so that people are fed, right? And then the other piece is then the movement of these goods to operate the economy. So road, rail, ports needs to be efficient. So when we then look at the infrastructure leg, is then tying that closely. Where is that strategic infrastructure? And so the work of the task force, which is quite a task, is to really look at where's the innovation. If you're not seeing the flow to counter that 11% current spend to what we actually should be spending at 100 billion annually for infrastructure, is how to look at innovation, blended finance. What can the policy recommendations implementable put forward in terms of getting then more blended finance structures to help us with this backlog of financial flow into infrastructure development. And then tied to that is, we can talk just energy transition, or we can talk climate change, but there's an African context on how we address that. And so the just energy transition, it needs to make sense to each economy as to where they are in their development. And so that would then tie back into also how these multilateral development banks then assess and look at our other emerging economies on the continent.
Sure. I mean, you are mentioning a few of the other task forces in reference to the climate task force. You made reference to agriculture, the sustainable food systems. I know there's employment and education as well, trade and investment, industrialization and innovation, and digital transformation. So yours, I'm sure, is not necessarily an umbrella, but works quite closely with all the other task forces, just given the fact that they will need the money to go round in order to do what they want to do. But again, it's just a question of understanding processes, Lutando, and I do understand that it is early days yet. First time that Sim Chabalala chairs a B20 finance and infrastructure task force. But given that he will need to understand, and he and his members will need to understand, okay, what are the real reasons why us as South Africa or as an African continent are paying a lot more for our capital than perhaps our partners over in the West, whereby we actually have a lower default rate according to some research. How closely then in finding those reasons, and also of course all the other things that you guys are looking at, how closely do you work with the other B20 members, as it were, in other countries, or you're keeping it South Africa specific right now in the similar fashion as Busi was mentioning in the Advisory Council?
Yeah, I mean, as Dr. Cass has alluded, the playbook has been shared, and so from a process perspective, Sim is the chair, and then he's deputized by Lungisa Fuzile. And then he then has nominated co-chairs. And very intentionally, those co-chairs are representation regionally, right? Regionally from both the Global North, Global South, with a good representation of the emerging and developing economies. And it's strategic folks from either development finance, or other banks, commercial banks, international chambers of commerce, but very intentionally to bring then the expertise to think through these different issues, but also to understand why the risk premiums are perceived the way they are. In addition to that, it's also co-chairs that have been part of previous B20s.
Okay.
Right, whether it's the Brazil one or it was the India one or the Indonesia one. So I think we have a very good mix of those co-chairs that will help us think through these things and make sure that we have that additional wisdom, as this was mentioned, to really get to concrete, implementable, solutions and recommendations for policy. And then that, now that we have the co-chairs in place, it has been then what is going to be the focus of the paper that we then submit through to the Secretariat and Sherpa that will formulate the B20 recommendations to the G20.
Okay.
And where we are now is we've outlined what those goals are. Very simply, as I've alluded, it's around cost of capital. How does it enable finance flows for infrastructure, especially for the emerging economies and developing economies? And then, how does that then address sustainable, whether it's infrastructure, just energy transition, but how do you get into the sustainable finance piece? Very clear, interlinked goals. You get the first one right, you get the second one, and therefore get to the third one. Not putting the other one before the other is not going to get us there. And so our first engagement with the coaches has gone very well, very supportive, very excited around the sub-themes that are underpinning some of these. And to your point, it's going to be important that we engage the multilateral development banks, which already set those up. The credit rating agencies, where the risk premiums are then sort of thought through and considered, because those add to the risk premium as they give the sovereign credit ratings. So for us, it's going to be very critical that all these different stakeholders are engaged as part of the process, and those are already been outlined for us as we then finalize the policy recommendations.
All right. Okay. So now that I think that we all have a basic understanding of the B20, the processes, what you guys have been up to for the past 100 days, and some of the things that you're holding yourselves account to as we lead up to November, where we're hosting the heads of state. Let's get into maybe the nitty-gritties and what people actually, really came to find out here. As you said, we can't ignore the politics, Kaz, so let's remember it. And I'm reminded by the launch at the B20 in Cape Town, where the president of the World Economic Forum, Borges Brende, said that this is the probably the first time in history that a G20 has been hosted against such a heated geopolitical climate. I mean, you've got the most wars going on in the world, on the continent, than we have ever had in probably most of our living histories. And we also have a little bit of an entanglement, I'll call it, with one of our major partners, traditionally being the US, which you emphasized quite a lot. How has that backdrop then just impacted your job in any way, shape, or form?
Well, look, I think that the geopolitics will be an area of discussion as the task forces start debating and discussing en route to finalizing the policy recommendations. You can't escape it, but certainly our guidance to the chairs, and we've devolved quite a lot of responsibility to the chairs, while as a secretariat we will oversee this and ensure that all the task forces are keeping to the script, keeping to the themes that we've agreed. We've also agreed to hard code in each of the task forces SME development and women empowerment. So we will ensure that as different iterations of the policy document comes out, and the task forces will meet at least once a month, that those documents do actually cover those areas. And so there will be, I'm sure the geopolitics will be discussed in each of the task forces. What we're trying to do is we're trying to cut through the political noise, because that's the G20's problem, thank God. We want to focus on the economics, on trade and investment, on what's good for business, all right? But at the end of the day, when we come out with recommendations, and at that stage, let's just say the politics are at a stage where the political situation might militate against those recommendations being implemented, then we'll comment on that. We'll say, these are our recommendations, this is our reading of the political situation, this is, we believe, is the repercussions if these recommendations are not implemented. But that's the extent to which we'll get involved in the politics. Okay?
But one can argue that we're already there, Kaz. I mean, if we look at the overall theme of the G20, it's been rejected by the US, who are going to assume the presidency. So in the rejection, and actually it's quite interesting because your theme is quite similar, you know, inclusive growth and prosperity through global cooperation. At G20 level, from a South Africa messaging point of view, we're told it's solidarity, it's equality, and it's sustainability. It's been rejected.
Well, I heard an interview by Zane Dangor yesterday. He just presented to the UN Security Council yesterday on our themes, the G20.
Who's that?
Zane Dangor.
Okay.
Who's
the DG?
Who's the overall Sherpa for the G20.
Okay.
And the DG at DERCO.
Okay.
Okay. He presented to the UN Security Council yesterday. Okay. And the American delegation at the Security Council didn't say a word. That's his interview. That's what he said yesterday. Everybody else, totally supportive of the South African theme and totally supportive of G20 South Africa. Okay, so we accept that the US wasn't at the first set of meetings, but then also made it clear in the interview that the G20 Sherpa in Brazil, the G20 Sherpa in the US, and Zane as the G20 Sherpa here have had meetings, and those meetings have been very cordial. And in fact, he's going to Washington today or tomorrow from New York, and they're meeting in person there. So I think that obviously our government needs to try and sort that out. But at the launch, I don't know if you picked this up, whether you were there then, but on one of the panels, the president of the International Chamber of Commerce, which represents millions of enterprises, made the point that America caters for 13% of global trade. We need to concentrate on the 87% that want to work together, that want open economies, that want to grow global trade in a cooperative way. And if America wants to join that, absolutely they must join that. But if they choose not to, we've got to continue with the work at the B20 level, okay? It's not cocking a snoot at America or anything of that sort. It's just saying that there's 87% of global trade that wants to work together, that wants to have inclusive economies, that wants to ensure that all people actually benefit from economies, that wants people to prosper and want to do this in a cooperating world, and we'll carry on working along those lines.
Sure.
And from a B20 point of view, American business is there. The American Chamber of Commerce has actually indicated very, very clearly that they are very supportive and they are ready to take this over into the next year. So that's what we need to focus on.
Okay.
And if the politics begin to interfere, then we'll talk to our government. I mean, we're interacting with our government on an ongoing basis because we don't want this just to be successful for business. We want this year to be an SA Inc. success.
Okay.
So we're working closely with our government. And look, there might be analysts here, I don't know, but if anybody here tells me that they know what's going to happen next month, I'll tell them they're cuckoo.
Okay.
Okay, so this is
Now
a very
language.
turbulent environment, and we're going to have to manage it as we go along.
Watch the language before I declare you persona non grata. But so you make a great point. 13%, 87%. But your 87% point also assumes that the 87 is united and is working as one. And we know that the 87 has also got its own cracks.
Yeah.
I mean, even here on the continent,
Yeah.
we see it.
Yeah.
And so we see. I want perhaps a comment from you in terms of, is it just that easy to say that, yes, okay, we see America, we understand the importance of their relationship, but this is what we want to do as well for the benefit of all, and if they're not part of the party, then that's fine, the party continues. Does it?
It does. It absolutely does. So I don't think that the world can be held ransom by one country. One important country, one country that obviously has a lot of influence, but they are not the be-all and the end-all. Fifi, there'll still be a G20 without the US as part of the G20.
Is that a
so
likelihood?
The multilateral, no.
People are talking about that.
I mean, already I think there's been iterations, I think, from the US.
Parts of the US influential people, I don't know if Trump has also said that is actually not going to be stepping foot in South Africa and be attending the G20. But we know, from what we see, from what we read, it looks like this notion of multilateralism, that,
Yeah.
right, is not, yeah, right, is not what this current presidency of the US is about. It's obviously about bilaterals and whatever the case is, but I think it doesn't mean that the rest of the world should actually be giving up on multilateralism, because I think those platforms actually served the world well up until now. We cannot deny that we are interconnected, as the world. The reason why so many of us have open economies is because we have all benefited from open trade, from the interlinkages between our own countries. We have been better for it. There's been a lot of exchanges that have actually lifted many of the countries up, whether from a technology perspective or from a digital perspective or infrastructure perspective, or the investment flows that flow through the different countries, or whatever exchanges, knowledge, information, people, we have all benefited from that. So that does not stop, just because Trump is in power. And it's actually very interesting, because when you look at the U.S., I don't know if U.S. is a homogeneous group, at the moment.
Sure.
Are they all singing from the same hymn sheet? Because, as Kes says, the 600 U.S. companies that are currently operating in South Africa are very worried about what's happening in the U.S. at the moment, because they see the benefit of having presence, not just, because remember, the ructions that the U.S. is causing at the moment is not just with South Africa, it's with every second country. So it makes it very difficult for American businesses who are actually working in Mexico, in Canada, and Australia, and South Africa to say, how do we then continue? You know, and I think these trade wars that are being started are also going to make it very difficult for for America to do what they need to do as well. So I absolutely agree with Cass. You know, there is the 87%, and we actually continue on that trajectory. If US is going to be part of the engagements, they will be, but if they are not, things don't change, and definitely things don't stop.
Okay, I hear you, and I agree to say that a lot of these companies that are here, they definitely see a purpose and a benefit for being here. I guess there's also a lot of questions as to whether they see and whether they are in agreement with how we want them to be here. And not only as South Africa, and I speak as the African continent at large, because now Africa is saying that, okay, all the minerals, and especially these ones that will power everything that's going to happen into the future and everything that's going to be electric, we want a little bit more of a seat at the table in that. We want that inclusive growth. We want the prosperity for all. And there's question marks around how we as the continent, or perhaps how government, let me exclude myself from the equation, is packaging that. But we'll come to that in just a short while, because I want to remind the audience who didn't watch the fabulous interview with Sim Chabalala on CNBC Africa, but also who haven't been keeping up with what's going on in your bank following the release of your results just last week. Was it last week? The week before? Time flies. He was asked about the geopolitics and how Standard Bank is looking at that risk. And he responded, and he said that in spite of the geopolitics, we have seen a lot of interest. We've seen a lot of flows coming through the bank from the US specifically, interest into the rest of the continent still. So maybe you can expand on that in terms of what you are seeing within your organization, you know, managing all this capital from various parts of the world, how various parts of the world are reacting to the geopolitics in terms of those dynamics. Is it impacting us? Is it hurting us? Or are they, as your fellow panel members saying, are they looking through that glass and seeing that opportunity?
Yeah, I think, Fifi, the other context to that, to Sim's statement is that we must not forget, pre-Trump and the Biden administration, there was already, with this diversification of supply chains that had to be done because of the war with China. That has now been accelerated. EU, Canada, Mexico, and probably South America soon into the fray. So I think if you just put yourself in the shoes of American business or corporates, they're like thinking, where next? You know? And so whether it's the ones that are already doing business on the continent or the ones that are now looking for alternative, it certainly presents that opportunity. And I think that's the additional context to that, because the politics are the politics, but the business is looking like, how do we survive, how do we grow? And I think the story of Africa is getting more and more visibility, and there's a better understanding around where the opportunities are for investing, and but also to do trade. So okay. I think that's sort of the underlying or unspoken insight. When you speak to US businesses, that's where they're thinking is like, where do we go where there isn't turmoil? So if you look at the continent, I mean, there's the excitement around the AfCFTA, so there's a bit of cooperation around something that's going to liberalize trade, free movement of people and investment, and therefore this multi-trillion-dollar income is sort of a prediction around what the AfCFTA can unlock. So when they're looking at that in other regions, and I think those are the things that are espousing interest. So I think we mustn't forget that, that at the end of the day, this is still the opportune sort of region to look at to invest. I spoke about infrastructure earlier. There's also laying around technology. There's been a scram around who's going to lead on AI, and for the longest time we thought between Microsoft and Google, and I think even Meta threw their hat in the ring. And then China showed, well, that can be done at a cheaper. So that is shifting a lot of things. Underlying all of that is the hard infrastructure, right? And this week we saw that Cassava, that is Strive's a company, together with NVIDIA, announced that they'll be building, I think, 4 or 5 data centers on the continent. One of those will be here. So I think what we must be conscious of is that outside of the political arena, there are these shifts and intention to invest in the continent. I think the tech, the digital angle, both the infrastructure and developing digital infrastructure on the continent is one that has a lot of interest from even the likes of the US.
Yeah, I was actually interested in that deal and wondering why perhaps Strive didn't look to China, potentially to supply some of those data chips. But we didn't get an interview with him. We're still working on it. We're trying. But I am going to open it up to you guys right now because, as I said, there's quite a lot of attendance in the room. And I imagine there's questions around small businesses, how we feature women businesses, how they feature, and ultimately how everyone can crack the opportunity that is the B20, G20. So, Marco, we've got a hand here in the front that's come through wearing a cap representing the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals. We see you, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you so very much. My name is Oliver Chikisari. I'm representing Azania FAP Holdings. Mine is just a quick one to Kasi. What are the timelines in terms of programs and policy recommendations to the government? And you did highlight I think in your presentation, in your submissions, in terms of how we should look into the value chain in terms of inclusive growth by, having the minority groups such as women and youth. How much are we doing in terms of making efforts to make sure that we are inclusive? And because we may miss this opportunity if we don't include people like young people. Thank you.
You want me to take that?
I think so. Yeah, let's
okay. So our time frame, we are aiming to hand over recommendations to our president around about the end of August, beginning of September. And then we want to use September and October as an advocacy period where we would use the local advisory council to advocate to our government. We've also put together an international business advisory caucus made up of global CEOs and past chairs of B20s. And we'll utilize that grouping to advocate to other G20 countries. And the Secretariat, myself, the head of the Secretariat, will be quite involved in the advocacy work as well. So that's a time frame. And then we've trying to dovetail the B20 summit with the G20 summit in November so that they close together and we can look for opportunities to actually collaborate there. We had a big debate on how we deal with SME issues and women issues. And I'll come to youth just now. And the debate went from do we have separate task forces for them or how do we deal with it. Eventually where we came out is that the guidance to all the task forces, not even the guidance, this is agreed by the steer code, B20 steer code. So all the task forces need to hard code SME development and women empowerment. So when those recommendations come out, I want to see in those recommendations how SMEs will be empowered and women will be empowered. So that's how we've dealt with this. We've worked very closely with the International Women's Association here. You'll see in the chairs that we have, there are 4 women, 4 men. We're trying our best to have a 50-50 representation in the leadership of the B20s. Our co-chairs, 1 man, 1 woman, co-chairs of the advisory group, 1 man, 1 woman. So we're quite serious about, and Brazil actually started this. They felt that the leadership of the B20 needs to be transformed from a particular gender point of view. And they set a target of 2030 for 50-50 representation. When the BUSA president and I went there, BUSA president said, forget 2030, we'll do it this year.
Well done.
And we're on track to do this, okay? So that's how we're doing it. On youth, there are people working in the SME environment, people working in women's empowerment environment on the task forces. Okay, so they've applied and they've gotten on. In fact, later today, I'm meeting with Y20, the Youth 20 element of the G20, to understand what they're doing, where they are. And what we want to do is, while the task forces are doing their work, we're going to have a series of side events during the year. And that a side event could be on youth empowerment and bring people from the G20 countries together on youth issues and so on. So we look at opportunities to get various sectors of our society connected to the G20 group.
And so how will we know about them? And will
We publicize
they be
that.
free?
Our media, our communications people.
Will there be a cost to attend?
Sorry?
Will there be a cost to attend the side events?
No
Okay.
cost. We'll host that. There are some side events that will be hosted by other organizations, and they've asked us to join them.
Okay.
And so on. So through a series of events, we'll try to touch base with as much as we can. But let me just, last point, because I've got to say this, and wherever I've been speaking, I've been emphasizing this. Busi is right. We want to promote South Africa. We want to promote the continent. But at the end of the day, this is about the B20. The recommendations that come out are B20 recommendations. They're not South African recommendations. They're not African recommendations. Busi's job and Busa's job is to make sure there are people on all the task forces. And they promote South Africa's strength, and they keep that conversation going so that some of that comes out into the recommendations. My job is to manage the G20 countries in this process and come out with a good set of recommendations for the B20. So I think we just need to understand.
No, thanks for that clarity. Sure.
To that, I think Cass is actually raising a very important point, because a lot of inquiries that we're getting as both Busa and PLSA is precisely, looking at how a lot of South Africans are obviously keen, to participate, and that is absolutely brilliant, because I think the more participation you have in the different task forces, the bigger the voice of South Africans and the bigger the voice of the Africans, broadly, is, as it were. But the issues and the discussions, so Lutando, I think, went into a great of detail to talk about what some of the thinking is, and as far as infrastructure, finance and infrastructure workforce is, a task force, is looking at. So yes, the leadership team, in the form of Sim and Lungisa, South Africans, the co-chairs come from all the other G20 member countries, and they are then participants, because then it's the chairperson, it's the co-chairs, and then there's the ordinary members of the task force. And that's about 150, 200 people in each task force. These people come from all the different member countries of the G20.
Mm-hmm.
So when we
volunteer as well, it's voluntary.
It's voluntary. And they are business leaders, because then you can't just go and say, I want to sit on digital transformation when you know absolutely nothing about that. Remember, the policy recommendations that come out, to Cass's point, are not going to be South Africa's issues. These are issues that affect all of us as global businesses and as the global economy. So you can't, therefore, so the thinking of South Africans participating in these task forces can be a narrow South African lens, as it were. Just because we happen to chair the B20 and the G20 doesn't mean that we dictate the agenda, first of all. And it doesn't mean that the policy recommendations that come out are ones that are meant to serve, South Africa. They are meant to improve the broader global economy, as it were. So that is why you apply to participate in the task force. And I think some vetting gets done to say, but are you qualified, for a lack of a better word? If you want to sit in digital transformation, do you have something to bring to the conversation from a global lens, right? Because then once you, and I don't even know what are some of the issues that are going to be discussed in digital transformation.
AI.
But you can now go and start talking about triple BE. Triple B is a South African thing, right? It is not a
But but it's empowerment. It's inclusivity.
Yeah, but then the way you couch it, right? But you can't say, no, we need to improve. Triple B is not working. No. Brazil, Indonesia, triple B is a South African thing. Okay. So I think there's going to have to be that lens, of people that actually participate there are people who are going to have to be able to engage and lift the conversation to a global level.
I think that's a fantastic point, and thank you for the doses of clarity that both of you have provided. But then how are they going to ask questions?
Yeah.
I'm timing you.
It's voluntary, but for some of the task forces, so we had applications on our website.
Sure.
For some of the task forces, we've had 350 applications.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So we've been through a process of sifting through these and identifying people who can actually add value to those task forces. And we've limited this. When I tell people this, they laugh. But we've limited the task force numbers to 200 per task force.
Sure. Okay.
So some won't make the cut. And so we just need to understand.
Okay. Okay. And please, no cold drinks to be offered if you don't make the cut. So we've got we've got two hands. Yes, ma'am. As the lady in the black, Marco, and then
Stavros hand.
Stavros, I see you.
Mine is not a question. Maybe I should stand somewhere where I'm visible.
Yes, fantastic.
It's not a question, but a comment.
Yeah.
And I'm going to try and be brief. So I've been on the journey of the B20, G20 for 15 years now.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Through BUSA during Jerry Villagazi's time. And I was the board member of NYDA, representing young people in business. I was a independent non-executive.
So NYDA, that's the youth
that time, when it
development
started,
agency. Okay.
BUSA invited me to the B20, G20 after the Canadian meeting.
Got you.
So I ran with the show. We formed a foundation proactively called the G20 Young Entrepreneurs South Africa. And we are hosting this year. And all we're basically saying, we're expecting 600 plus young entrepreneurs from 20 countries. You guys have done extremely well. BUSA, BLSA, I must put it to you, because I've been on task forces throughout the last 14 years. And we are also part of this voice that we want support of as we host. Know about us. We are getting, it's an excitement because Brazil was a bit shaky a little bit. So everybody's looking forward to South Africa. It's time to rebrand. It's time to, get our messages going, and we are here. That's all I wanted to say. That congratulations, and we are ready to host. And our 1,000 entrepreneurs are waiting to come in September.
Let us know. Maybe let us know. Just given the fact that those 1,000 entrepreneurs
we will
are
let
the
you know.
faces of the continent, and maybe we can amplify it in some way.
100%, and the AU as well. We're getting a lot of AU and diasporas attending our conference.
Lovely.
At the convention center. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Sophie. Oh my goodness. That's my friend. Okay. All right. Yes. Obviously also part of the Y20. Yeah, fantastic. Sorry, it's a friend I haven't seen in a long time. Lost my professional cool there. Let's get back to action. Stavros, Executive Chair there at Aspen. What say you, sir?
Thanks very much, Fifi. And I have a very short comment, which I'm going to preface first, and hopefully the comment will elicit some reactions. So, firstly, can I say that this is my third B20. I participated online during COVID and one in person. And I'm particularly proud to stand as a South African and say that our start has been exemplary and well executed. And certainly at an advanced level to what I previously experienced. And the previous was good, so you can imagine what I'm talking about here. Now, a very quick response. As a business person standing here, what do I want to personally see out of our B20, G20 presidency? And of course, there's T20 and P20 and all of those, right, as a cluster. Two things. Number one, how is this going to enhance investor confidence towards our country? And number two, how is this going to deepen and widen trade, investment, commerce, and business? So those are the two things. So if we want to look forward in 10 months' time and say, did we or didn't we succeed, those for me are the two measures. So the question around, will the US be part of it or not, I think the posture of business, and Busi and Kaz can comment me on this, is that we look at where our best economic interests lie as a country, and they lie in the West, they lie in the East, and they lie in the emerging South. And I think we have to use this platform to deepen our economic and commerce ties in the East, in the West, and in the South, and I think that is exactly how we are being positioned, and I think that's what we need to be alive to as a business community, is where do our best economic interests lie. They cannot be just around one country, as important and powerful as that one country is. Of course, we do want to trade with that country, and I am optimistic we will eventually find some middle road. But whilst we navigate, let's never forget that our economic interests lie in the East, West, and the South. Thanks very much.
Okay, no, fantastic. Let's one more, and then we'll wrap it up as we are.
Sanbanan, my name is Dudu Makari. I'm a farmer in the Northwest, and Sisbusi's comment around how the B20, G20 works, I think is noted. So perhaps mine is a question for how do we then leverage, because we can't get involved, because I'm not an expert in any field, except I'm just a farmer in the Northwest province. So how do we leverage? So how do I go back to the Northwest? And it's a remote village in Motlhave, couple of 100 kilometers away. So for me who's sitting there with the other farmers, what is the message to us? How do we get involved? Are there trade things that we can participate in? Are there offtake agreements that we can log on to and find and then say, great, we are growing spinach, so there's an offtake agreement. I'm sitting here lost thinking, I get it. I get the logistical things. I get how it works. But me, a regular South African who's trying in my little corner, what does this actually mean in real terms for me? Are we just spectators and be like, okay, great.
Sure.
Like help.
No, 100%.
I'm even struggling
Understood.
for words to be like,
Understood.
so how do we get involved, just as a regular person?
Okay, understood. Thanks. And not just a farmer. You are, of course, responsible for feeding us on a daily basis, you and your fellow compatriots in the industry. So maybe let's wrap it up. Just get the 5 minutes that we have. And also feel free to comment on what Stavros had said about just maximizing all relations and not just with one.
Okay.
One party.
Stavros'
Wow.
point.
Lucy's got the mic and Kaz goes. I love this.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Sorry. You were looking at me. Sorry, Lucy. Oh, yeah.
So I think Stavros makes a very important point in as far as the importance of the U.S. and the broader West, as it were. You know, I think if we had a choice as South Africa, and I think if we had a choice as the world, we wouldn't be sitting in these tensions with the U.S. that we're currently sitting in. We are better off as the world with the U.S. in it and with the U.S. collaborating. You know, I actually was looking at these stats that were actually shared at our B20 launch, where they were actually saying that the U.S. still matters. They matter because they are responsible for 30% of the global trade. They own, or they have 35% of the global population, and they own 50% of the global military capabilities.
That's why.
They say if you...
Watch what we say.
Yes, global, yeah. 50% of the global military, so they can wipe all of us out. So you add China's 20% of the global trade, you add the EU's 20% of the global trade, just with those three countries, you're sitting with 70% of the global trade, you know? So I don't think that we are actually trivializing the importance of the U.S., you know? And I don't think we can actually deny how they actually, I mean, all our economies are going to be turned upside down the way ours now, just with the withdrawal of the U.S. aid. You know, 15,000 jobs on the line. I don't know how many requests I've had, just as BLSA, to say plug in the U.S. aid gap, you know, because it is really going to turn things, you know, upside down, and it is going to leave us worse off, you know, as a country. So I think I just want to acknowledge what Stavros is saying and definitely say he's absolutely correct. And I think Dudu makes a very important point. But I think when all is said and done, you know, even though South Africans cannot actively participate in this thing, when all is said and done, and Stavros actually said it, we would have won as businesses and as a country if there will be more investment opportunities coming into South Africa. So the reason why we're saying this is our opportunity to showcase our country as an investment destination. We had lost that, you know, spotlight and that role, you know, because of the state capture project and the many wrong things that have actually happened in this country. So this is our opportunity to actually showcase it. Kes will tell you that the reason why we as business decided to actually have our B20 close to the G20 is precisely because we want to create an opportunity for those bilaterals, you know, and for the businesses and the governments to actually engage, you know, because Brazil had their B20 in October and they had the G20 in November. So when you have it a few days alongside each other, all those business leaders who are actually coming here
have an opportunity to see our country, have an opportunity to engage with our ministers, you know, and vice versa. And the reason why we are considering hosting it in Joburg, where the G20 is going to be hosted, is precisely because of that proximity. And I don't know what the thinking is yet, but if I'm not mistaken, the 2 days between the B20 hosting and the G20 hosting, there could be an investment something that is actually going to be done by government. So that investment conference, investment something, could be an opportunity, therefore, to say these businesses that are coming with investments, that are looking at South Africa as an investment opportunity, how do we then create some form of, I don't know, pairing, you know, matchmaking, or I still don't know. We're not responsible for that as B20, it's G20. But I think, you know, that is the thinking. But if investment comes through, Fifi, then we all benefit. You know, then we can actually grow our economy at above the 1% dismal economic growth rate that we've actually been seeing.
And I think that I agree with yourselves. I know we're going to get to you, Kaz, in just a short while, as well as Stavros, in terms of our yardstick and what we should be measuring ourselves on in terms of the success of hosting this conference, both at a G20 and a B20 point of view, is how much FDI we actually manage to attract and how more attractive we make South Africa as an investment destination. Unfortunately, we've got to pay our bills, so the live component of this conversation is wrapping up, and just bidding farewell to our viewers who have been tuning in the past hour. I'm sure we'll be hosting a whole lot more conversations in the lead up to the main state meetings in November, so do stay tuned. We will continue to discuss here with our audience who are live. If you feel like you've missed out, next time make sure that you join us here in our Johannesburg headquarters. But do have yourselves a wonderful day further, and of course, thanks so much for watching as always.
Thank you.